Thanks for that, Pat. Being honorary consul of Barbados, as my wife says, big hat and no cattle. So don't get carried away that I somehow spend my holidays in Sandy Lane. The title of my presentation, I'm not going to use the PowerPoint and all the slides I have. Nobody else has, so I'll stick to the convention. But really, that's a summary of what I have to say, so I'll leave it up there. What is populism? The phrase has come into play probably within about the last 18 months. It has been used in every country in the world practically. I will define populism as it involves playing on people's fears, their hopes, their desires, their sense of powerlessness, their anger. So playing on people's sense of disenfranchisement with emotionally loaded, simplistic sound bites that dupe them into voting for short-term palliatives, facile solutions, and promises that are not only not achievable, but are detrimental to their best interests. In a recent speech to the Scottish Parliament, President Michael D. Higgins spoke a lot about populism. And he said the growth in populism, which appeals to people's emotions rather than their rational side, threatens democracy. Populism, as I say, has taken hold around the world. What's Donald Trump's populist, emotionally loaded, simplistic slogan? We want our country back. We will build a wall to keep out Mexicans, and we will get rid of all the Muslims. In Britain, what was the populist slogan that brought them to the disastrous decisions that they made? We want our country back. We want our country back. And one version of it was, we want to be us again. And in Ireland, one of the biggest expressions, if you like, of populism was around water. Water is a human right. Abolish water charges. Abolish Irish water, a bloated quango. Words like bonuses and consultants were spat out. On the Joe Duffy show, charges became hated charges. And the power of populism in our era, in our time, has always been there, has been supercharged by the reach of social media, where sound bites are the currency of communication. Now, Ireland's water system, I've lots and lots of stats here, I'll just give you a few illustrative. This was the situation that Eamon Ryan has talked about that needed to be grappled. Only 50% of all the drinking water produced ever made it to the taps. 1 in 3 of wastewater treatment plants weren't fit for purpose. 44 locations, including 7 in Donegal, discharging raw sewage without treatment. And I've many more gory details of just how clapped out our water system was and allowed to become by a failure of both local and national government. Eventually, and Eamon has told the story, so I won't go over it. I agree with him, it wasn't down to the Troika forcing it. The government finally set out to sort out this mess of drinking water. But from the outset, they got 2 things right with the foundation of Irish water. One was a unified national utility. And the second was polluter pays principle. You have to pay for water. There has to be a charge, but also because for polluter pay reasons, but also for an incentive to conserve. And I'm sure Maureen could talk about that. If there isn't that incentive, people are not going to conserve. So they got that right. But Irish water from its outset, was encumbered from birth with extraneous baggage that were bound to enrage the public. And the public rightly became enraged about them. The whiff of intent to privatise, that was real, in my view. The demand for PPS numbers. Staff contracts out to 2026, when clearly rationalisation was on the cards. A flat charge versus addressing ability to pay. The suspicion, which I don't know anything more about than you do, over SiteServe, the sale of SiteServe. and the poor communications from Irish Water about consultants. And just briefly on that, about the 50 million or the 78 million. When the HSE was set up, it was not given the money to put in place the infrastructure to run a health service. And last week I heard of a patient's file in the mental health area being sent from Limerick by taxi. So it was a necessity to set up the kind of systems, and I'm not going to go into the detail of them, they're massively complex, in order to run an integrated water system. And it's not just to do with billing. Now, those encumbrances around Irish Water were compounded by political incompetence and arrogance. The whole process was rushed through the Dáil in 3 hours. There was no preparation or education of the public about the state of our water system, the cost of producing water, and the imperatives that we had to address following the signing of the EU directive in 2010. There was poor timing. When they finally got to it, people were weary of austerity. And then to make it worse, the minister goes off to Brussels, leaving this whole mess behind him, washing his hands of it, to a plum job in Brussels. And not only that, but the government caved in, stepped back, as Eamon said, or somebody else has said, and gave a free hand to if you like, to those who are protesting against water. And then they brought in the €100 cashback. I mean, could you think of anything more absurd or more an appeasement that everybody saw through it for what it was? So the conditions were ripe for populism. There has to be a grievance for populism to work. American people, middle America, has grievances. British people, poor people in the north of England, for example, have grievances. And we in Ireland, the people of Ireland, had lots of reasons to be angry, disappointed, fearful and frustrated. There were legitimate grounds for public anger, especially among poor and disadvantaged people. You had the unacceptable face of capitalism, which other speakers have talked about, that Stephen Donnelly talked about. The EU itself, its treatment of Ireland in the banking crisis and its treatment of Greece. And locally, our crisis in health, homelessness, police, floods, the abuse of children in care, the failure to deal with nursing homes, any number of things. And into that sense of unhappiness, you dropped in Irish Water. And it became the lightning rod, which then was seized upon by many of the political parties and the political system. So Irish Water presented the golden opportunity to exploit people's angers with a populist election platform. And they did. The assault on Irish Water dominated the political discourse. As I've said, water is a human right. Can't pay, won't pay. I went down to Irish Water to get some facts and some maps. And I have maps of Donegal here with me, for example. The taxi driver told me he had gone for a second golfing trip to Portugal. He had bought 4 tickets for Garth Brooks so that himself and his wife could see him twice. And he was going to watch Ireland in the Euros in France. And I asked him, and what do you think of water charges? Well, the expletives the roof of the taxi nearly came off. Water is a human right, I got all those things back. Abolish Irish Water, people need a break. There were street protests. And then Sinn Féin were spooked by Paul Murphy, winning the election in Tallaght, and Fianna Fáil were in turn spooked by Sinn Féin. And in that context, I think it was Eamon mentioned, the government stepped back. And I spoke to one of the Taoiseach's very top advisors after the election. I said, why didn't you counter that with explaining the kind of stuff that needed to be explained about Irish Water, about water, our water? Forget about the name Irish Water. He said, we decided it wasn't a winner. We decided it was a loser, so we just decided to say nothing about it. So this vacuum was created where there was a free hand and open season on Irish Water. The media, one of the pieces of information Irish Water gave me was it was done by a third party, by some company, tracking media coverage of Irish Water before the election. and it was predominantly negative. It had got onto the bandwagon, if you wish. And all of this inflammatory rhetoric, as it was said in Britain after the murder of Jill Cox, inflammatory rhetoric has consequences. I want to read you a letter that was published in one of the broadsheets in Ireland, and I'll say which one it was. And this letter read, Irish Water employee gets an earful when he stops to admire the rare hens. And this was an Irish Water worker going in to put in the meter. The woman of the house confronts him when he was admiring the hens. And the letter's quite long, but listen to this section from the letter. After a lecture on trespassing without permission and the immorality of his intentions on behalf of a putrid company polluted by venture capitalist sharks, he slithered off sloth-like towards the gate. A question I would like answered is this. Are these employees of Irish Water Garda vetted to come mooching around people's private dwellings? For all we know, they could be released murderers, con men, or racketeers. The makeup of a person who gets any satisfaction working for an outfit like Irish Water is not too far from the mindset of a certain set of auxiliaries not loved in this country, the black and tans. It is funny, but it's bloody serious. How would you feel about being an Irish Water worker? Guess where it came from? It was published in the Irish Examiner, which is published in Cork, and the letter writer was from Gorta Kirka in Donegal. Now, how many Cork Examiners are sold in Gorta Kirka? And I'm old enough to guess where that came from and who orchestrated that. But that is bordering on incitement to hatred. I wrote a strong letter to the Cork Examiner, complaining about this, both the writer is in, and I strongly criticised the editorial judgment in publishing that. They published my letter, but they censored it. They did not take the point that I made. Now, while this relentless, populist, nasty campaign continued, Irish Water was delivering what it was set up to do. And I'm not going to go through all the statistics, but they've removed 300,000 people from water systems that the Environmental Protection Agency said that were at risk drinking water. They've increased headroom in Dublin from 2% to 8%. They've repaired 500 metres of the worst mains, and so on and so on and so on. They've reduced, and this is important, for the charge of a bloated quango, was a bloated quango, in the concessions made to both all the various unions at the outset of Irish Water. They are systematically reducing costs by 7% per annum, and they've already delivered 14%. They'll have delivered over a 3-year period 21% reduction in costs. Now, I have a wide experience across a wide range of companies, public, private, and semi-states in this country. There's nothing like it. In the Post Office, in the ESB, or anywhere I like to go, that is a huge performance. And they've published the first 25-year plan for water with specific targets for 2017, 21, and out to 27. I have here 2 maps of Donegal. You won't be able to see them. I'm not going to bother putting them up here. And it lists all the projects, including, by the way, a big one in Gorta Hork, where our friend is to deal with sewage going into the sea or something into the rivers there. So there's 171 million set out to be spent in Donegal, dealing with wastewater and that's sewage and improving drinking water. And they have a map of Ireland as well. Now, moving on, prior to the election, 64%, as Maureen has referred to, were signed up to pay. And at the rate that that was going, it was trending towards 70%. And I want to make one remark about Sinn Féin's attitude to these figures. Lynn Boylan, another Sinn Féin spokesman, are saying Irish Water charging was not established. 64%. But when they got a vote of 55% in the north to leave, when the Brits, do you follow me? They took the 54% as a mandate to get a national poll. So they will use the stats to suit themselves. Post-election, what happened after the election? And then I'll come to what does it tell us about Irish politics. The result was interpreted as a referendum on Irish Water. Even though Millward Brown poll shows that water was 6th in line of importance to people's concerns, after health, the economy, crime, homelessness and jobs. In Dublin West, Ruth Coppinger's constituency, 10% of people considered it important. After the election, Sinn Féin unhooked themselves from their anti-water stance. And the first part, within 48 hours, Owen O'Brien, who spoke here yesterday, this morning, they looked for a commission. And a few days ago, they said we don't need a commission. So they're shifting their ground depending on which way the wind is blowing. Fianna Fáil were impaled on what they had gone along with their Irish water policy, and they made it a red line issue in the formation, delaying the formation of government. As Eamon said, they shafted it at the time when statesman-like stance was called for. After the thing, a bit like in Britain, the media became positive. There were all these stories from the media about Irish water. And a commission was set up to advise the Dáil on water. Now, I'm coming towards my conclusion. What does Irish water, that story, which I've gone through briefly, and Eamon has given you more on it, what does it tell us about Irish politics? I'll go through it by each party. Fianna Fáil. In 1997, as Eamon has referred to, Fianna Fáil bought the election by eliminating house rates and car taxes at the last minute and ramped home with a 20-seat majority. They did that without any regard for the cost, short-term or long-term, or the public interest. They did it to win the election, as O'Donoghue said to Eamon. In 2003, they appropriated and vandalised our civil service to gain advantage in the local elections, something which has resonated right down to the present in the performance of the public service, in the civil service, without regard for the consequences. It was a vote winner, and that's why it was done. 2000-2006, 12% per annum pouring more oil on the fire and crashed the economy with catastrophic consequences in 2006, 7 and 8. And after all of that, Micheál Martin in particular made all these promises about you don't need to remind Fianna Fáil about this anymore. We've learned our lesson. There has to be a new politics. He was one of the first people to talk about the new politics. Along comes the 2016 election, and what happened? Irish water was the winning ticket for Fianna Fáil. So what we learned, what the Irish water tells us, 2016, about Fianna Fáil is, I'll use the Irish version of it, Brisin an Dúchas Tre Thuailh an Cata. And I looked at various translations of that, and it says, the natural bent comes to the fore. And that's what happened. I set this out in an article in the papers, and Micheál Martin accused me on radio of bias and poison. I don't do poison. I set out the facts. And he didn't deal with those on the radio. They shafted Irish water, as the whole project, as Eamon said, at the crucial moment when something else was needed. So if Fianna Fáil's natural bent came through, Fine Gael, what did we learn about them? It's not clear what their natural bent is. It's not clear what they stood for, what they stand for. They did not show any kind of, strong, muscular government at a time when it might have worked to counter the anti-water austerity thing. As the advisor told me late afterwards, they just decided to remain quiet, keep their heads down. Part of their natural bent, which they're now beginning to cop onto again, you heard, what's her name, Regina Doherty and the Taoiseach talk about it, referring back to the just society. They've discovered that again. So what I have learned about what Fine Gael during the election was, it's not clear to me what is their natural bent. And if you want to top that, what possessed the Taoiseach to appoint James Riley? He of logistical logarithmic progressions as the basis for distributing primary care systems. Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin, like Fianna Fáil, did a U-turn on their stated policy, and I've gone through that. And so what did we learn just in general about them? They adopt a posture of radicalism. They fraternize with the radical voice, as they see it, especially on the left. They hoover up the votes, and as soon as they have them banked, they then begin to shift more towards the centre, more to the establishment. And they've done that on lots and lots of occasions. But I want to deal with one thing that Owen O'Brien, he quoted a French philosopher who said that people who see popular movements and have a distaste for popular movements hate democracy. Popular movements are not the same as populism. Populism is about rising people up with emotive language, inflaming passions. That's what populism is. And that's not the same as a popular movement. I have myself protested outside the Dáil, for example, about the failure in mental health services. And the 4 million people in Britain have now signed a petition to have the referendum rerun because they said they were lied to. Now, I won't use the word lying, but the Irish people, a lot of people, were misled by the anti-water campaign, and I'll give you 2 or 3 things. Sinn Féin in particular cited Northern Ireland and Scotland as places where you don't have to charge. They are the only 2 regions in Europe where that's the case, and Europe is not letting them away with it. They are pursuing Britain to sort that out. It's misleading to cite them as examples that work. They have not told you, and Eamon has alluded to it, but without spelling it out, we have about a year to sort this out for reasons as Maureen brought in. Once come 2017, between 2017 and 2021, inclusive, that's 5 years, between 2.6 and 3.4 billion will have to be found from the Exchequer to fund Irish water if it cannot fund itself like the ESB funds itself out in the markets. The hard left. The hard left has brought an anarchic element into our body politic, with facile, taking no responsibility, and, as Eamon says, wanting to bring down the institutions of the state. And it has spread. You have a head of a Garda organisation saying he was prepared to go to jail. You have Halligan in the Dáil disregarding the Constitution. Ministers not paying their water charges. So the electorate then, what do we learn about the electorate? Well, that's yourselves, folks. Recent poll, Fianna Fáil are top of the pile again. Micheál Martin is the most popular leader. So go figure that. Very short memories. I'm reminded of Peter Mayer saying the electorate is hostile towards the state, sees the state as an enemy. And the electorate are suckers for sound bites and for the promises of a free lunch. In conclusion, you're quite privileged this evening because I'm going to actually give you a preview of the recommendations of the Expert Water Commission on Water, which actually hasn't started its work. But the can they have kicked down the road, I got hold of it and I'm dealing with it now. The recommendations of the Water Commission will be for a single unified national utility with effective regulation, like the ESB. The polluter pays principle will be upheld with a basic allowance plus pay for extra. There will be provision for genuinely can't pay. It will not be funded by the Exchequer from general taxation. It will be off balance sheet, as they call it, like the ESB, and it will not be competing with health, education, social welfare and so on. And there will be cast iron guarantees to remain in state ownership. I'm prepared to take a bet on that. And Joe, yes, if you bring us back next year, as Eamon has suggested, I would suggest that that's what will happen. I conclude, the main thing I wanted to focus on here, using the question that was posed by this conference, was what does the story of Irish water tell us about our political system? And the thing I want to draw attention to on this, if I haven't lost you, is that populism has arrived in our body politic with huge force, supercharged by social media. And I quote President Francois Hollande following Brexit. This is the President of France after Brexit. He said, populism can quickly destroy what it takes a long time to build. Thank you very much.